Welcome to day 2 of the summit at Diamond Mountain Retreat Center with Borderlands Restoration Network and Sky Harvest. We're in the big meeting room at Diamond Mountain, welcoming our local volunteers back from a second day in the field, tossing and stacking rocks in the wash. How did it go? Yeah? How many dams did you make today? 5 dams. Oh, excellent. 5 dams. Excellent. Okay, closer to 9 or 10 dams. 3 different groups with some maintenance from the efforts of our last volunteer crew that Borderlands brought out recently. So thank you all very much for your work here. I'd like to introduce our director at Diamond Mountain Retreat Center, Sonoran Mayor, and she's going to fill you in on a little bit about Diamond Mountain.
Thank you, Connie. I'm totally excited about the working together of these 3 organizations for the project Reshaping the Earth at Diamond Mountain. And yesterday, Caleb introduced DRN. So today I would like to introduce to you Diamond Mountain. We are a Buddhist community and retreat center, and it was founded more than 20 years ago. And since we are living according to our Buddhist principles, we are not hurting any living being. No human, no animal, no insect, no plant. That's why we are living more or less in a national park. We have the same animals as all the national parks around us. We have a broad diversity in plants. And with this project, we even try to get further, and we build it so green as it has been before it has been colonized by the white guys. We are a retreat center, so we have 27 cottages spread over 1,200 acres. I see the smiling faces of all my volunteers. If you want to come to live in this beauty of animals, of solitude, of quietude, please, please do so. And also maybe you want to come next time when we have our next volunteer week and help building the roots of that. Thank you so much.
Our presenters yesterday were amazingly helpful in our capacity to help restore habitat for all the animals and plants here at Diamond Mountain and in your neighborhood. Our next speaker, I'm delighted to introduce. His name is Rudy Poe, and he will speak on the topic of humans and nature working together. I first met Rudy at his homestead and literally delighted at the harmony. I felt harmony with the natural cycles that he in his profession designs and encourages, which result in a beautiful vitality for all the animals and the plants who live there. His focus is, as Caleb described yesterday, catching water and keeping water on his property. He was a permaculture designer who was a project director at the Watershed Management Group in Tucson. And he now works with rural landowners throughout the state of Arizona to create rich ecology focused on enhancing natural systems to ensure water availability. We're blessed, I mean it so much, with your participation in projects both at Diamond Mountain and Sky Harvest. So please help me welcome Rudy Poe.
Okay. Hello, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here and to be able to speak about a topic that has been a passion of mine for 2 decades, actually now. And to start it off, actually, I couldn't say it any better than Wendell Berry himself when he quotes, "The care of the earth is our most ancient and most worthy, and after all, our most pleasing responsibility. To cherish what remains of it and to foster its renewal is our only hope." I chose that quote in particular because I think it's really relevant for what my presentation topic is about and where I have been guided naturally and the things that I've seen. So we're going to go. Oh, will I be able to see the presentation over here? Okay. Okay. So yes, humans and nature working together. And just like Wendell Berry said, it's time for us to take care of it. So I remember the first time I experienced that care was in an indigenous community in Mexico, where they had practiced similar things of slowing water down. And that's exactly what we're going to go in today, because as I found in my work, I discovered actually, talking about indigenous systems, I discovered how our great-grandfathers, great-grandparents had built systems in and around our even local area. So I felt so excited when I came here and I could have the capacity to share what I discovered. And that's what I'll be sharing right now. Next slide. So the first thing before I get started showing you these discoveries is just to orient you to what you'll be seeing in the next few photos or in the coming slides. And the main thing that I'll be showing is specifically what many of our, for our ancestors or recent ancestors have done, were these larger, more labor-intensive systems called a swale on contour. And a swale essentially is a trench. A swale on contour specifically is a swale that is a trench that is dug on contour, meaning all the points that are the same level, the same elevation level along the landscape. And then on the downhill side of it, there's a raised mound where all that excavated material for the trench has been piled up on the downhill side. And the result is in the trench area, water collects from uphill and it's allowed to slowly infiltrate the soil. Some of the benefits of that is that there's the increased infiltration of water, and rather than water just running downhill with nothing really to stop it. And we've already learned from previous workshop or previous speakers that you can slow it, and that's just as effective. And in this case, we're slowing and stopping. The other benefit is there's a massive increase in the amount of biomass available. And whenever there's the increase of biomass, you have increased organic matter and you have increased infiltration. That third one is really important, especially for our climate. Deserts, as you know, are known for having low organic matter. And you could prove that as you even just go walk out on trail and you'll notice a lot of aggregate material. And aggregate, I mean to say, is you'll see like rock and gravelly or sandy type material or fine clays, but you won't see a lot of the darker like humus or organic matter, which might be woody material in there at all levels and all stages of decomposition. So that's another bonus, is because just like you're trapping water, these systems become ways of trapping organic matter. You know, bugs and life and wood and everything kind of starts to collect in here and decay. And the fourth one, I think, is in particular an important one, because in the context in which I work specifically with homesteaders who want to find ways that they can mitigate their dependence on well usage. And really the first step for that is, well, where do we get that freely and abundantly? And that's in the rainfall. I don't have a statistic for our area, but I know for a fact that Tucson, if you just took the boundaries of the metropolitan area of Tucson and calculated the amount of rainfall that falls within that boundary, there's more than enough water to supply the entire water needs of the whole state. So I use that story or that fact just to point out that the water, what comes from the sky, is so abundant, so clean and ready for us to capture. The fourth one is for these homesteaders, is really how can these systems help protect human infrastructure? So many of you who live here know that when we get a storm, especially a monsoon storm, it can come in a 1 inch to a 2 inch to even in a 1,000-year event, like 3 inches within a 24-hour period. And if you haven't experienced 2 inches in a 24-hour period, we're talking about like, you feel like Noah's Ark might float down somewhere along the way. So these systems are really effective for that, because rather than having a house that gets a sheet flood of about 1 foot deep, you can completely redirect those flows, put it in the ground, and then once it's fully saturated, you can redirect those flows away from the house. So another big benefit to how you can design and use these systems. Next slide. Other opportunities are, and you'll see this, is it creates an amazing habitat for wildlife. And I'll talk more about that as we go deeper into this presentation. The second one here is increased biomass can also provide quality feed for livestock. And again, I'll show you more about that as we get deeper, because the grass and the forage capacity of the landscape drastically increases. Water infiltration can help with what we are experiencing all around these valleys here, just a dwindling water table. And I'll actually tell you more about that as we go further along, how much we can kind of expect. I had a hydrologist once tell me that it's easier to track water when it's surface level. As soon as it goes underground, it's kind of a mystery what happens to it. So that's why I just say that lightly with increasing water table. And next slide. Okay, so the first example I'll show you is one that's actually it's actually an internationally famous example, and it's right outside of Tucson. And so I just wanted to give this quick overview because Tucson has such an arid climate, more arid than here. It's sort of the epicenter of one of the zones of the Sonoran Desert, where the saguaro cactus is prevalent. And in the 1930s, during the Great Depression, FDR, President Roosevelt at the time, put Americans back to work through the Civil Conservation Corps. And so what they ended up doing was they increased land productivity by building what I just showed you in those last two slides, swales, in the landscape. And so you could see from an aerial view here what those look like in the aerial. You'll notice sort of a canvas of brown all around these little dots or lines of dark green there. And so, next slide. What you're seeing there in that dark, on the brown sort of canvas around there, is that sort of typical landscape, Sonoran Desert landscape. In this case, in the background, you could see saguaro cactus. And for the most part, in that area, you see creosote bush. And creosote is a species that I'd say is sort of an indicator species of just how dry it actually is. Generally, from what I've noticed in different projects, the more creosote there, well, I mean, the presence of creosote means generally high runoff rates, which generally means really low organic matter and also lots of aggregate material. So you get lots of high volume flows and less water infiltration. Therefore, creosote thrives in those drier conditions. Next slide. So as soon as you enter one of those swale systems, it's a completely different environment. And this is a photo that's taken by my mentor, Geoff Lawton. And it's incredible the way he describes what he found there. So on the outside of these systems, we're talking about, like, you could not even put your hand, you could kind of scrape the top and probably grab some rock of the soil. And then going into this system, he was able to put his hands down 8 inches and pull out blackened material. And black is the color you really, really like. You see that in the desert from soil, something magical is happening there. So, and then the other result of this was over the 100 years it's been there are 20 to 30 foot tall mesquites. And then there is dense, I'm talking about incredibly dense grass. Okay. So I think it's important to point out, like, what's happened with this system. And what's happened is that people shot a video about it. And then people put a pin on Google about it. And that's about it. So, like I mentioned earlier, the possibility of productivity for a system like this is being radically underutilized. Especially when you think about the level of soil. And so it's important to recognize in this, and also remember there's a fact out there that's estimated that for every 1% increase in soil organic matter per acre, that's the equivalent of 20,000 gallons of water extra that you can store in the soil. So you're essentially increasing the battery storage capacity of soil as you increase organic matter. The other component of that is 8 tons of carbon is sequestered from the atmosphere and is locked up into soil organic matter. And then additionally, the life cycle of plants helps that along. So without this being utilized, we're losing a lot of that productivity, especially, it's not uncommon in desert soils, the area outside of that swale, to have less than 1% organic. And then going into that, just looking at the texture and the feel of that soil, it's feasible to say that soil organic matter level is definitely beyond 2%, if not more, which black soils tend to be more like 5%. Okay. Next slide. Okay. So yeah, we're going to take it out of the context of that famous Tucson example. And I want to explore, since this is a wonderful opportunity to share it, is our projects that exist around our local area, around the Sulphur Springs Valley, and which is only less than an hour away from here. And this project here is just west of Bisbee, Arizona. And I don't have a scale bar up there, but in this aerial that we're looking at, what you see there is, you go from the top left, you'll see an orange arrow. In the bottom right corner, you'll see an orange arrow pointing inward. And if you follow that line, you'll see a sort of general gray or green line, dark green line following that whole line. And if you can guess what that is, it's very similar to what you saw at that Tucson example. So it must have been a similar project done decades ago that had a similar purpose of putting people back to work, but also creating viable habitat for probably at that point livestock and forage. So next slide. So if you zoom into one of the sections of that swale, this is what it looks like. So I love showing this photo because when you look at it, you can visually see what's possible. You can really notice how it expands beyond its own initial footprint. If you look at the front part, the dark green, the front part is the left-hand side of it. Those are 20 to 30 foot tall mesquites. And actually, just go to next slide. And well, this slide, before I actually zoom into it, one of the issues with that I found here is that as we've planned and developed and we've built roads and infrastructure, we basically just blazed right through it, cut right through it. And as you can see, if you look to the left of the road, the part closest to the road been completely dewatered. And so versus the part to the left, furthest to the left, still maintains, captures a significant amount of water to maintain the ecology. And next slide. So similarly to the Arid Valley swale is the canvas of the landscape outside of that, this micro biome here is similarly all creosote. And we were out there, Kyle, who's volunteering here today, who helped excavate this close to this land. We found right below that, within like the first 6 inches, caliche, at least this thick, if not thicker. And so, again, you can see what the canvas is like, and it's really high runoff, low organic matter level. So next slide. This is us zooming inside of it. And just look, incredible. This system is at least based on the tree sizes and from what I saw from those the Arid Valley swales in Tucson, at least as old, based on the maturity of the trees, and that there were some big dead trees underneath there too. On top of that, there are some riparian species of trees growing in there. And including there was a canyon hackberry, which I think we had looked at or we were admiring earlier, that there's a canyon hackberry here. And then specifically, if you look within, just look at the density of the grass. Right. So this system, which is only just one line across the whole landscape, is a huge resource that could be used for cattle, can be used for all sorts of things. Especially seeing what's growing in the tree hedge of it, the possibility for fruit trees, some sort of fruit crop is possible as well. Next slide. Here's another view of it. We could kind of get a feeling of where the water, the part where the water fills up. And what's important to notice about this system is, like, this is probably about 20 feet wide, the actual area that harvests the water. But then back behind it, 100, 200 feet, it's all thick grass. So it extends the biodiversity, the soil organic matter, the plants biodiversity all the way back, quite a ways behind it. Next slide. We're just going back to the past slide, but the main issue with this is just pointing out how these systems that our great grandparents put up aren't really being looked at or not really respected for what they can do or what they are doing. And where the red circle is indicative where it's happened probably at 5 or 6 points along the whole length of this system that was created, where a road was paved right through and it completely dewatered the whole system. So, next slide. So, what are we looking at, and what would be applicable if you're in an arid climate? So, based off of what I've observed and seen, and also based off of talking to other designers who have more experience in, especially like really arid climates. What's really important for these systems is, in particular, just like the one rock dams or the trincheras that we've been learning about, these systems have a very specific use. And when I think about the usage of this system, I think that it's really important for us to recognize that we get a ton of flow, a lot of flow, high flows in the desert, which means that capturing and storing that in larger systems is really important. So that's one thing I found was for our desert swales, is that the larger, the better. And in particular, that last one you saw was quite large. We're talking about 20, 25-foot wide swale, and then the berm itself was 25 feet wide by, must have been 6 to 8 feet tall. Also, what's really important is because we do have more erosive soils, is you can see these systems that have established, the grass established, 200 feet behind it. And that grass is critical at maintaining the structure of the entire system. So seeding is an important aspect of our systems, and which ties into earlier talk we had with the viability or the success rates of seeding, which can be quite low. But because there is more water here, seeding and the projects I've done so far have been almost 100%. I say almost because there's one that has recently seeded, and I don't know what's happening yet with it. And then the other aspect of managing the systems is to how do we manage cattle in these more vibrant range, and these like range and forage dense features. Okay, next. Okay, so the third project we are going to look at is this other one. This is west of Bisbee as well. And it looked like it was around the same age as those earlier projects that we just saw. But you'll notice just immediately in the aerial, this green patch with the orange arrow is pointing out. And next slide. And then as you zoom into it, immediately you notice this oasis. I don't think I have a photo of it, but the surrounding landscape is very similarly all creosote. And in this area, they created a dam to harvest water from a drainage way coming off of that mountain range right behind it. And it's incredible when you go in there. 30-foot tall mesquites, cooler, vibrant, and then the only use that it's being used for is just cattle at this point. And as you go there, you'll notice the water is filled with algae and just not super healthy, which we'll get into that a little more in a sec. But next slide. But yeah, zooming into it, there are so many species of grass, and there's also mesquite, and in some parts went towards the right, I had noticed that there was some hackberry growing there as well. Next slide. This photo, I just wanted to really show that this entire system is being, I would say the equivalent of being overgrazed. As you go into it, there's just deep tracts of cattle all around it. And why that's important is it doesn't allow for riparian or wetland species of vegetation to grow. And therefore, those species can't help with maintaining the health of the water and like reducing algae and making it essentially more of a human use type area. Next slide. So I give you kind of a quick tour of these projects that other people have doing for the last century. And they're still successful, even after being forgotten. And I think that's the biggest point to make about that is they're here, they've been forgotten, and what do we do with them now? I've mentioned earlier that these systems can be really important for cattle grazing and specifically how we manage cattle and move them around there. They can be used for agricultural purposes. And in this specific case, that pond could also be used to help irrigate crops. Next slide. So we're going to go into who's doing this now. And it's not the CCC and the government funded operation. It's all just grassroots funded by people who want to make a difference. And so in this photo, you'll notice Kyle, my excavator, working the excavator to cut in a swale that mimics the same size and width. So it's just important to notice what it looks like. But I wanted to show this just so you can see kind of what it looks like initially, because it looks like a lot of destruction. And we're soil, removing soil, breaking it down. Some carbon is emitted, etc. But as you can, if you refer back to the past slide, they quickly become these rich, nutrient-rich zones, organic-rich zones. Okay, next slide. Again, here's another project, the next phase after the excavation. And in this case, what we have at our disposal now is pre-mulch that we throw in there from one of our local towns or cities. And then with the mulch, this whole thing is seeded. And I didn't have time to update this photo, but I just checked on this right before I came here and noticed that it's littered with grass. So our seeding efforts were successful. And a big part of that success, I would say, was as we dug this in, as we seeded it, our volunteer, or no, this was paid labor at the time. The labor at the time, we all raked it. We just raked. They seeded first and then raked everything smooth, covering it up and avoiding predation from ants. And then we added the thinnest layer of mulch where you could still see the subsurface, but that offered an additional layer of protection. So this is so important to point out because the seeding, I didn't think the seeding would be successful, but it was. And I think those two steps really helped out. Okay, next step. Okay, so this is my homestead. And you'll notice in the two blue areas, the biggest blue area is not a swale that is a swale that unfortunately I didn't take. I would have loved to, but it's was already there. And based on the age of the size of the trees, I can only guess it's, it's old. Maybe as old as the other projects I showed you. Because as you go in there, there are 20, 25-foot tall mesquites. There are riparian species of trees. And then as you can see, on a 300-foot behind the swale itself, and that surprised me about it. I thought the vegetated area that would get all the benefit would be in front of the swale. It's actually that area behind the swale that gets the most amount of grass. But yeah, behind it, 300 feet is a lot of grass. Next slide. So here's an aerial view of that site. On the north side, you can see a smaller swale that was installed, but then on that southern one, that older one, you could see where it starts to pond on the left. And then more important with this is I just want to show just how much grass is available. Especially that's important for homesteaders. So next slide is really like the slide to show. Next slide. That ponded area. This is what it looks like. What you're looking at is 350,000 gallons of water that stayed from the monsoons and was there up until about February or March next year. And this water pumped to help irrigate my crops, and then all that grass behind it fed all those goats. Okay. So if you look there, the tallest tree there, it's a cottonwood tree. And those trees grow in areas that have lots of water. Okay. So I just get blown away when I see that. It blows me away because, we didn't have to use, the well. We can use the systems that are right here, right now, and capture that water. And through the technology that we did use is having to use a pump to pump that water for our use. But there it is. You can use it, and it was definitely a viable source of water. Next slide. So these are some of the people that are doing it, and to the left there are some clients that I've worked with, and then to the right are people that I just wanted to point out. Tiny Shiny Home, and that's their family enjoying their swale. And yeah, I'm really inspired by the work that they do, because they've inspired even more people to do this, which if you remember that last slide, that's essentially what we're going for. Our systems that we can use for the direct and immediate benefit of our homestead, our animals, and the local wildlife. Next slide. So what can we do? And there's a lot we can do, and this short list definitely does not cover it. But I think one of the top things that is worth pointing out is I think these features are definitely worth taking care of and preserving in some way. I think that a second factor that's really important is that managing cattle in these systems is really important, especially as you saw in that pond system, where the pond can't really establish its ecology with all the trampling all around it. And then also they can be overgrazed and whatnot. The third one is to utilize these features as part of an integrated design plan. So if we're going to build roads, or build houses, or demolish land anyway, or as part of our human development plan, we can incorporate these structures as part of that generative destructive force, essentially. Another thing that I noticed in all of these is invasive species are equally as important here. So since these old systems are there, and that's a specific example at my homestead, I had to mitigate and remove tamarinds, which, traditionally farmers had used that as a windbreak, but in these systems, they don't really offer a lot for us as homesteaders, or, especially at the homestead scale. And then, the last one is we could to consider these features as viable agricultural water sources. So this specific feature here used to actually be used by farmers who grew peppers. And what they would do is they would, similarly to what we did, they would just pump the water out and irrigate their acres of crop on the left-hand side on the other side of the feature. Next slide. So thank you for listening to me babble about this. And I hope it inspires you to build a one rock dam or start digging a basin or swale around your house. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Oh, okay. Thank you, Rudy. Very inspirational and miraculous that so much water is available simply by creating structures to capture it and hold it. It doesn't take any more genius than that. Dig the hole, the water will come and it will stay. So I'm glad you're available to our community to provide a little more of the expertise and detail needed to be successful in this venture. And we're very grateful that you're here. So now, this afternoon, we're going to be breaking for lunch. And later today, we will be delighted to hear from Karen McNallis. And she's the Native Plant Program Manager for Borderlands Restoration Network. And she's been vital in helping Diamond Mountain and Sky Harvest in their arid lands restoration efforts. So thank you for coming today, and we'll see you again soon.